Mike Wozny's here, and we're going to talk about bodybuilders and what bodybuilders need to learn that they haven't learned yet. And a lot of things that get published in research, a lot of things that are common knowledge with academia don't end up always getting to the people who are trying to make results happen in the gym. Gyms are not really incentivized to give people results. They typically just give people access or sell them personal training. And they don't really care what you do, and even if you're being ineffective, and that's too bad, because there's certainly more effective approaches than people are doing now. One of the things I regularly say is, if regular weightlifting and cardio for weight loss works so well, where are all the fit people?
Right.
Yeah, pretty much everybody with impressive physique has like a supplement contract.
Yeah.
It just shows you how rare that is. It's really rare to be in great shape. And a lot of people should be in great shape. Millions of people should be in great shape, but they're going about doing it wrong. Let's talk about, Mike, your journey when you started moving away from weights.
Moving away from weights, I guess it really started 4 years ago when I was getting desperate because I hadn't competed at that point in around 4 years because of an injury that kept egging me from squatting.
Yeah.
A quadricep tendon issue. I had, hurt it, and every time I would rehabilitate it and working my way up again, I eventually just would start swelling up, and there was nothing. I felt absolutely defeated. And the funny thing is, that's when Phil Hernan had met you, and I had a small interaction with you, and you talked about balance and the bands, and then I started paying attention to the band thing, because back when I was younger, all bands were these like surgical tubing things that we used to pump
bands used to be a joke. Yeah, or they're great for rehab. Like an outward rotation movement where you just outwardly rotate. So just to rebuild like your rotator cuff from surgery or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I had a lot of shoulder issues from obviously bench pressing. Most guys that have shoulder issues, it's from bench pressing.
And they're not doing anything wrong. That's just what bench pressing does to your shoulders.
Correct. Yeah. You get most load in the stretch position, and it eventually is going to tear them up. Started adding bands to my lifts. And I remember I was training this one girl, and I had her doing, lateral raises with light dumbbells. And then I would put this band around her wrists, and her delts just started growing, and they actually got remarkably, and we started adding bands to bench press. I started adding bands, I started doing double leg work on balance, and that caused my hips to engage properly. I started using my abductors, the adductors, the glutes, everything came in together, and it held everything in a place where, in order to balance perfectly, I had to do a perfect squat. I couldn't put a load forward.
Yeah.
I didn't have my
exercise on an unstable surface, and you're gonna fire everything.
Yeah. So everything was just equally tuned in, and my joints weren't getting, like, there was no pain. So I started working deeper and deeper and deeper, and then I started adding a band over my shoulders. Well, eventually what I would start doing is, going back to squatting, then I would get set back again.
Yeah, sure.
I kind of had thought like competing was going to be the end of it all for me. It was done. I was getting older, screw it, and I was open to still training guys, but I was working these long hours in these weld shops, and I was training. I was still going to the gym, but my legs, like, I would just do what I could, and it was always a depressing thing. But it was well over a year ago now. I started doing single leg work and just adding bands to it.
Yeah.
And all these guys are telling me, "Oh, I've worked with those bands. They don't do anything." But they never really just worked with bands and kept doing it.
And they didn't really give it a shot. They threw a band on something they were doing, and
they throw it on a weight. you throw it on a weight, and then, that people talk about how that gets you between plateaus. Well, that's because the muscle's pushing harder through the whole movement, and it's going to hypertrophy more, and it gets stronger. It's not strengthening really the end. It's not strengthening the end of the movement. It's strengthening the muscle altogether. It's one muscle,
Well, you fire more tissue when you're in your stronger range.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's not like
all these guys are talking about how you're creating this kinetic energy. It'll throw it at the end or whatever. You're strengthening the end of your movement or whatever. I'm like,
true. And there's
you're strengthening the muscle, period. Your max amount you can go lift is going up. And so obviously knew Phil Hernan very well. And
yeah, one of my really good friends.
He'd been one of my very good friends for the last 12 years. Yeah. And I just trusted him completely. He never steered me wrong. And he had been doing the band pretty much, that's it, for the last, I'm going to say 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I want to,
yeah. That's how long we were working on that.
He trained Cedric McMillan with bands, and Cedric was very impressed with it.
Yeah. I got some great pictures on the website of Cedric using the X3.
Okay. Yeah.
He graduated to the X3. Yeah.
Okay. And then he had introduced me just briefly to another guy that you and I had actually discussed earlier. And all these guys look great, and they're just using these bands. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to give it a try. And I actually got a lot of backlash. I couldn't believe the amount of people that just thought I was completely stupid. Like, I had friends getting a hold of me, like, you're not bodybuilding anymore? Like, I'm just wondering what avenue you're going down.
Right.
And I said, well, I hurt so bad, and I'm willing to try anything,
Right.
And if Phil believes it, even though he might be crazy at the moment, he's never steered me wrong, and Phil's not stupid by any means.
And as we found out, Phil was never crazy, and he's actually brilliant because he pick out the right thing to do.
And you want to, and then so I'm doing the single leg work, adding bands, and then Phil finally said, Mike, it was about a year ago. He said, you're not going to know what bands do unless you just use them,
Only.
Yeah, do them. I'm like, okay, screw it, I started using just bands and finding different ways. And what he did was he said, Mike, you're scientific, you like to dig in. He said, try a bunch of stuff and get back to me and see what you come up with. Well, I'm doing all this crazy balancing and putting bands on everything and rigging them all over the gym and trying this and that and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm starting to figure them out in my head. And I'm thinking, okay, so let's say a really easy thing to think of as like a curl.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd start out with a weight, like say a barbell curl.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start out, it's going to be the same. It's going to be, let's say you got 80 pounds there with a barbell curl. And as you come up, it's 80 pounds right out of the hole. And then actually after you pass halfway up, because it's static resistance against gravity, you start to lose, and then you have to.
When you approach the fully contracted position, the weight actually goes down because the lever arm is becoming closer to the origin.
And the weird part is in your head, you don't feel this weight in your hand. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of, at first it's weird. Mm-hmm. But then I started noticing I could less paying attention to the weight. I started paying attention to the way my muscle felt.
That's right, because you don't have a weight to drop.
Yeah.
So focus on the muscle you're trying to fatigue.
You start, and it's like 20 pounds of resistance, and it's kind of funny feeling at first.
Yeah.
But as you come up, it gets to the point where it's like comes to a dead stop, and it is the hardest contraction you've ever felt in your entire life. Mm-hmm. And guys would tell me, oh, yeah, you can get a real good pump with that, but it ain't going to build any muscle. And I'm like, I started thinking like, well, resistance is resistance. Your
muscle doesn't know what you're contracting.
My muscle doesn't have a freaking clue what's going on there. And not only that, is it wasn't limited to a linear plane and gravity pulling it straight down. This stuff could go all over the place. So the stability of it was, pretty soon your whole, like you're stabilizing to stay in it, and then your muscles getting taxed.
And then the more stabilization firing or growth hormone gets upregulated, it all kind of dovetails together.
Yeah.
All the principles we've been talking about when you go to fatigue using a strong level of variable resistance.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about it, and, like every rep would get a little shorter. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I started thinking, well, rep ranges don't matter as much anymore, because when you use a set load, when you fail at the top, you're definitely not going to get it out of the bottom.
Right.
It's done. Then at that point, you'd have to drop a weight and then do like a drop set.
Right. And then that discontinues the contraction. Blood starts rushing in to recover the muscle.
Yep. And then you got to start
all. You don't really have the benefit. You have no hypoxic benefit. You're not going to change your myostatin levels. You just, basically your drop set just like fucks everything up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even it does create a better pump, and they've proven that the pump lowers myostatin. Right? Obviously, because it's hitting the ceiling of that muscle, stretching it, and it's like, well, we're going to have to expand, So let's say at the first rep, you hit this wall at 100 pounds, and pretty soon it's 99 pounds, and it's 98.6 pounds, and as you come up, you recruit all these fibers. You're recruiting fibers into the contraction rather than just out of the bottom, right? Mm-hmm. So like all these fibers, they get contracted, and then they start failing from the strongest. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon you're getting about halfway. And most static holds, you're just holding a weight that you could normally lift. Mm-hmm. But you can pull against it. It's like you're hitting a wall. It's frustrating for a lot of people because they don't understand.
It definitely feels different. When developing the X3, I definitely had the same. It's funny because I get irritated by the trolls that are like, "Oh, weightlifting, I like the way it feels" or whatever, and I'm like, okay, I guess results don't matter. But I get it, because when I developed my prototype,
it feels foreign.
Because you like seeing that big amount of iron moving around, on a bench. When I remember the first time I did 225 for repetitions, it was like, wow, like I really liked seeing that weight move. I felt cool. I was like, wow, that's something. I'd never done that before. And then when you're just using banding exclusively, so, for those of you who have trouble picturing this, so if I've got banding hooked here and then wrapped around my back, let's say I go to 20 repetitions with 550 pounds, and then I can't get there anymore. Well, then, and this is what Mike's talking about, then you start shortening up the rep range. So you're dealing with less weight because you're not stretching the band as far. So you're dealing with less weight here. So now I'm doing repetitions with 300 pounds. And then I can't get there anymore. And then I'm doing repetitions with 200 pounds. And then at the end, I can only do this, like just maybe an inch of movement. But you have fatigued every range of motion and every fiber within the muscle. And that is something you will never do with a weight. It cannot happen. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about variable resistance, and people get wrapped up in like, well, how much weight is that? Like, okay, it's 550 because I just give people a point of reference, but that's not the point.
Doesn't even matter.
So not the point. But they're kind of halfway right, because, and I'm going to reference two studies, and we'll put this in the show notes. There's Fry in 2010 and Linamo in 2005, two different studies that showed that the amount of testosterone activity that you have in your body has very little to do with how much testosterone you have coursing through your body. It has to do with how many receptor sites are open and looking for that testosterone. So now,
the testosterone levels are irrelevant if you don't activate the receptors.
That's right. Yeah, you can have all kinds of testosterone in your system, even exogenously, and it's not going to do what you think it's going to do unless you're putting the heavy load on the body. What we're talking about right now is a superior strategy.
Right.
For heavy. It's not heavy as in on a bar. It's strategy to get the most force through the muscle, and that's going to trigger the growth. The most force and the most fatigue is going to trigger the maximum amount of growth. So here's an interesting observation. I've been a testosterone replacement therapy patient since I was 28. I had some testicular damage and rugby, just a bad rugby hit. And then what I noticed was I had a prescription for what seemed like a normal, I didn't have any point of reference, so it seemed like a normal dose.
Right.
And then as soon as I developed the X3, like I've been taking TRT for years and years and lifting for years and years. So from basically 28 to 39, I put on maybe a couple pounds of muscle. The best thing that happened with testosterone was I felt a lot more calm.
Yeah.
Like I felt I had like a little anxiety
Sense
before
of
that.
well-being.
Yeah, just well-being and you know, the reason I first noticed it was I was having heart palpitations, and they were like, "Oh, your cardiac muscle is really weak," and I was like, "We're talking about a run like 80 minutes, like just sprint stop in a rugby game. Like my heart is dynamite," and they're like, "No, like your cardiac muscle is underdeveloped." So that's how I knew I had to get a prescription for testosterone, and then when I did, I saw almost no muscular benefit. But then here's the weird thing. So I started using variable resistance at a very high ratio variable resistance, which is what X3 is. So as I was developing the X3, I go in for additional blood work, and my physician would say, your free testosterone is almost zero.
You're using it.
Right. And that I did not know about these two studies at that moment. And so I'm like, that's weird. So he's like, well, we're going to up your dose because I don't know where it's going, but it's disappearing. Yeah. And so he raised it up a little bit. And sure enough, 6 months later, he needed to raise it up again. And sure enough, 6 months later, I've never had to take any sort of countermeasure for my TRT. Like a lot of guys, like they have to do, an anti-estrogen or a aromatase inhibitor or something like that.
Because you're using it.
Right. And so because the muscle's using it, and I know the muscle's using it. And so like I gave this interview for this National Geographic documentary, and because what I had to say was not controversial enough, they cut it, which is just I was like, I'm actually giving some useful information here. The other shit in this documentary, I don't know. But it was really funny because it's like, if people people who are, let's say, not TRT, but like using performance enhancing drugs, if they proceeded with this logic, I believe there could be somebody who's like a Mr. Olympia looking guy who may actually not need to take nearly the amount of stuff that people do.
I completely agree.
Because you're matching the hormone with the use.
Yeah.
You actually have a way to track it. It's free testosterone.
What I have found, John, is testosterone doesn't cause you to directly just get big. There's a lot of guys that walk around with a lot of body hair and a deep voice, and they don't have a lot of muscle.
Right. Most who use testosterone exogenously.
It's causing that constant activation of the muscles. And with a lot of times with weights, we stagnate so quick because the tendon gets as strong as the muscle, but when you're causing damage to that tendon, eventually it limits your progress.
Yeah.
And then you're not getting that contraction where it's the load increases all the way to the very bitter end, and it's activating those receptors. So same thing, since obviously it was different. Bodybuilding when I was younger took steroids, and then I came off of them when I was like 29 years old, and my natural levels were like 54 nanograms per milliliter. Ouch. And the guy calls me, Mike, that's like a woman. I'm like, well, no wonder my girlfriend thinks I'm cheating on her, because I wasn't sleeping with her. You're really pretty, but that's about it.
Yeah.
So obviously I went on HRT, and for years I had taken 300 milligrams a week. Recently, I made a post telling everybody I'm microdosing. I'm taking 20 milligrams a day of this testosterone enanthate, 6 days a week. So it comes to 120 milligrams a week. And I'm holding all kinds of muscle.
Yeah. That's real smart. I like it.
Obviously, I'm a little flat right now because of not eating for 3 days, but you can look the pictures up. I've been documenting training, what I've looked like through this whole just using bands, and I'm getting away with basically taking less than most guys do HRT wise and seeing better results.
That's
and
awesome.
Some people, there's a lot of guys that take so much shit. They're like, oh, he's probably full of shit. I'm like, try it.
Yeah.
Like try it.
Most of what
excuse the language,
is just completely wasted. It doesn't go and do what you think it's doing. If your body doesn't have the receptor for it, it's not being used. You're not growing, but you're just causing side effects and all kinds of.
What I've noticed is if you're not, what the larger doses of steroids seem to do is the bro split everybody talks about. If you're doing the once a week training, all that stimulus and that doing 12 freaking sets in a day and not training it for a week, then I guess because you're taking so much shit, you can recover from that ridiculous amount of volume.
Yeah,
but then you don't shrink as fast because your protein synthesis is up. You don't have the protein breakdown like you would naturally, and the cortisol's down, so you don't shrink by the time you get to that next dose, or the next time you work that muscle. But if you know how to work that muscle very efficiently multiple times a week, you're stimulating it constantly, you don't need to worry about the atrophy effect because you're hitting it before it happens.
Right.
If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. And
so like these large doses seem to help a guy like hold his size, but it's not necessary if you changed your training with the variable resistance, the higher frequency, max stimulus, least amount of damage. The more times you can train a muscle, stimulate it and recover and do it again, the better off you're going to be.
We'll cover this in another show, but one of the things that Mike and I were talking about over the past couple weeks was like soreness and like tearing a muscle and muscle damage. It's the opposite of what a lot of people think. A lot of people think you actually do small tears in the muscle and then it recovers and grows. No, small tears in the muscle actually ensure that you do not grow. And it is only when you do not create micro tears that you do grow. So they are inversely related. The more damage you do to the muscle, the less you're going to grow. And I would say it's really funny, like between high school and the time I was 40, I probably gained, other than like puberty and shit, like just growing up, I might have gained 10 pounds of muscle in that huge period of time. After turning 40, I've gained 60 pounds of muscle, which is not supposed to be a thing. Like you turn 40 and everybody's like, well,
all downhill,
you're kind of all like muscular or not. And, like it's too late for you. Yeah, that's not true. Yeah.
It's beautiful. We can, as you use the testosterone and you can, add more, you're not going to get side effects. You're using it, but you're going to gain muscle.
Yeah.
It's like the wave of the future here. It's very exciting. Very exciting.
It is exciting. And it's also, it's going to be safer for everybody. One of the problems with bodybuilding that never makes it, because the problems with diuretics are much bigger. The problems with one of the biggest problems bodybuilding has is 300-pound people who are lean, because 300 pounds of muscle is putting a lot more stress on the human heart than being a 300-pound fat guy. Because the 300-pound fat guy, that extra body fat is not drawing blood. It doesn't have a demand. It's not vascular.
Yeah.
Right. So from like just
800 horse engine with a 2-barrel carburetor.
Right. A lot of people are going to get that.
Fuel pump.
Yeah. You don't. I like car analogies, but not everybody is a car guy. So like I often say, like when like a lot of performance enhancing drug users, they'll be able to affect the muscle, but they're not affecting the tendons and ligaments at the same rate. Because we haven't figured out how to anabolically enhance tendons and ligaments from a chemical, biochemical, exogenous standpoint.
Sure.
So you see a lot of bodybuilders with extreme muscularity, but it's like putting a Formula One engine in like a Prius. You'll blow the wheels right off the car as soon as you like hit the accelerator, because
strong enough to rip yourself apart.
Yeah, you don't have the tendons and ligaments. That's another thing that variable resistance does. When you're loading towards the end, closer to lockout, that will actually grow tendons and ligaments. But when you're lifting weights, you're going to pick a weight that you can handle back here, which will never really affect the tendons and ligaments because it's just not heavy enough.
It's going to cause micro tears in the tendon, and the tendons take a lot longer
to
heal.
And you said it earlier, and that builds scar tissue. And then the scar tissue will have you rip your tricep, your pec. And that's why, like, seasoned guys who bench press, who've been doing heavy bench press for a long time, all of a sudden they rip their pec doing something that they've been doing for years. Like they're not going for a PR. They're just benching. Like, why did I rip my pec? Well, because every time you're benching, you're creating cumulative damage. So let's break that cycle. Let's have you use a high ratio variable resistance. And then you're going to do great. And you're not going to have any of the downsides.
Yeah, I knew a guy that did that once with his bicep. He always curl a lot of weight, and he was putting a radiator hose on a truck, and his bicep popped off. Just trying to put a hose on the radiator. It's like it was
not even. Yeah, he was probably just at an awkward angle, not even really stressing his bicep. Yeah. Right? It's because the scar tissue everywhere. Yep, and I'm guessing that guy's not lifting heavy now.
No.
Yeah. Well, he could use variable resistance with great proficiency.
Yeah. I've got a lot of friends that, lifted with me when we were kids, and they still were like hobby wise. They like to work out in the garage or whatnot, that have been following me, and they've been ordering X3s. And I got one guy that said it's Wozny's voodoo band magic. His body doesn't hurt anymore.
Yeah.
His term makes me laugh, because he's like, yeah, Wozny and his voodoo band magic. He goes, like, Mike, I realize
man. Like, he's right. It's like everybody that I tell to start training this way, and or the X3 users, they're like, I just can't understand. Like, is it really, like, apparently it really is this simple.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's silly. It's
only challenging because there's so much that we were all taught. And it's not that those things were wrong. Like, now, when I wrote this book, when I wrote Weightlifting is a Waste of Time, this title is to get your attention.
Correct.
And, if I had called it like, the variable resistance method or something like that,
right,
who would have bought that? I sold 100,000 copies of that book pretty much instantly, because people were like, oh, fuck this guy. I want to read this so I can discredit him. And then they read it and they're like, really got to rethink my training. Like this is
became the Charlie Sheen of weightlifting for a minute, and then
I kind of did.
And then when it started working, then you weren't a bad guy anymore.
No. It's okay. The guys that think I'm a bad guy. It's like, the fact that I wrote the book and everybody started talking about it. I mean, keep in mind, like, it was difficult for me to cross into fitness because I was always in medical device. Like, OsteoStrong was a technology that I invented, and it's to treat bone density. And people with bone density challenges are typically postmenopausal women. They're not really even online talking about that much.
Right.
So, like, I really didn't have much of an online presence. So I really kind of had to kick everybody in the nuts to get their attention. And that was really what the book was about. But there's 250 scientific references, 260 pages. And it tells the whole story of everything we're talking about. But we're going to wrap this one up, and we're going to keep doing these and really focus on like what bodybuilders need to be more successful and to have longer careers, and even treat bodybuilding as like a longevity thing. Because like right now, the way people approach it, it's a self-destructive thing. And we want people to be able to be fit and healthy and happy, up until they're elderly. And that's the mission.
There's no reason you can't look amazing for being 65, 70 years old.
Absolutely.
you know.
Right. And there's anomalies that have had that happen to them.
Pulled it off. Yeah.
Right. But we're going to have it so that everybody can be like that.
Right. Right.
Yep. Awesome, Mike. This is a good show. We're going to do it again real soon.
Okay. Thanks.